Welcome to the unofficial last structured episode of Nighthawks, and today we have an interesting story that I have to be honest here, after the hole we got ourselves into with Stella Lansing, aliens traveling in time, I was like, what are we going to be talking about?
Yeah. That wasn't even an episode, that was just in our heads.
And in hindsight, we were looking until I kind of realized and debated with you that we've been talking all along about, in each and every episode, we've been pretty much discussing, is this real or is this fake, right? So discussing the true nature of things. And in that fashion, we uncovered today's story, which is about the first ever faked photo.
I knew it was going to come to me when I had to say the name. I knew it.
I'll say it. So the person that we're going to be talking about today, his name was Hippolyte Bayard. I think for me, the question was, when I was looking to find this story or to find more about this story, was, what would you do if you invented photography and nobody cared? Or you were kind of, in a way, played with? Well, what would you do, Sadie?
Oh God, I don't know what I'd do. I'm worried that would go on some kind of rampage and attack loads of people because I'd be so angry. I feel sorry for Bayard. I really, really do, because I was researching this and going, oh my God, wouldn't you be absolutely raging? Because you get things like that all the time when you think it's basically second place. And, it's like, well, you were number two. It's like, yeah, it's not number one, so what does it matter? So, we'll be talking about another friend of ours that we've been speaking about before, but I suppose we should maybe go back and give a little bit of I suppose.
But you haven't asked me what would I do.
I'm afraid to ask you.
Because I will answer something in the same fashion as I did in the Mumbler episode. I am a martyr. I've been suffering with this injustice, so I just do something crazy to end it on a dramatic note and move on to the next life. Well, hopefully Mumbler would take a picture of me at some point.
Yeah, well, now to be honest, not much is known about the early years of Bayard. But we do know that he had a love and a passion for photography. It was more like a hobby, I suppose, for him, because he was working in an office at the Ministry of Finance. And that was his kind of 9 to 5, which is a really common thing. Everyone has their kind of 9 to 5 office jobs, and then they have their
But that in itself suggests that he had a somewhat wealthy background, because I believe in the times that we are talking about, it's not any person that first and foremost has access to an education that will provide them with an opportunity to work for the Ministry of Finance in France. And also, we discussed this in a previous episode. I can't remember which one at this point, but we said that photography was more or less an hobby of wealthier people. So the fact that he could afford chemicals and etc., that suggests that he has somewhat of it might not have been a extremely wealthy or rich background, but it could have been wealthy enough that provided him with these opportunities, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose just to kind of give more background, he was born in France, as we said. It was 20th of January, 1801. But as we said, had his day job, obviously had enough money to buy everything he needed to experiment in photography, which was still kind of in its infancy at that stage. How he did it was he had discovered a way of permanently fixing images by dipping paper into photosensitive chemicals and exposing it to light inside a camera obscura he had built himself.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was more like we had been able to capture images for a long time now, but we hadn't been able to actually permanently fix them. And it's interesting that it seems sometimes well, I don't know what you think of coincidence, but it's quite a coincidence that, you know, we had this issue, right? How do we fix these images permanently? And it seems as though like a few people, maybe even more than what we actually know publicly, kind of came up with a solution, even if by different, pardon the pun, exactly, by different methods, but still like more or less around the same time. So we're talking about Bayard, but also there's other people, like in England, I remember reading very briefly about Henry Fox Talbot, and then also obviously we know the Louis Daguerre, which we'll be talking soon enough. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting that everybody fixes the issue in and around the same sort of period of time.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a lot of, even when we go a bit later, when it comes to kind of first films and stuff, a lot of it's happening around the France area,
Yeah.
we say. No, imagine, I mean, it would have happened a lot quicker, I suppose, due to social media, but we'll talk more about this later. I think there's a bit of word of mouth, and I think there's ideas maybe being swapped that have been passed on.
Yeah, but if you think about it, France was also the country where obviously one of the most advances in terms of filmmaking was done. In 1895, you have the Lumiere brothers. Even though I know that Thomas Edison was working around the same period, you know, and he was doing his like projects in this improvised studio that he had. I remember reading about this in my film history classes. But anyways, yeah. So I think because France has had a sort of tradition with image making and obviously a great artistic tradition, I think it makes kind of sense that, you know, this kind of was bubbling within the French culture and background.
So a lot of his images kind of centered around, I suppose, were influenced by still life, images around his house, in his back garden.
And I remember, I think I wrote something like this on our notes for this show that I share with you. My thoughts on this was when I first saw some of these photos that he meticulously arranged and he put the statues and little objects. It really shows an attempt, and we'll see why this is important back later in the episode, but it really shows an attempt of storytelling. It really shows an attempt of showing something that is not literal, because he really wanted to build meanings with like putting a straw hat or putting this or putting that. So it's very, very interesting. And I think one point in favor of our friend Bayard.
Also, he has a lot of really nice things in his house.
Exactly. And the fact that he owns a nice house, and this is why I inferred that he would belong to a somewhat wealthier background. But anyways, I think we've explained this already.
Yeah, so he arranged the kind of fancy objects in his house, and a lot of like statuettes. He's mad for this straw hat, which kind of plays a bigger piece later on.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of just, it's showing more than just, you know, snapping a picture in your living room. It's kind of, it tells more about his life, I think. And what kind of, I suppose makes him even more of a pioneer was that he started to do self-portraits.
That's right.
Which were kind of, I suppose, can we call them some of the original selfies?
Some of the original selfies. And I'm someone who loves to do like self-portraits. I think it's very interesting. And I've talked before, maybe I don't know what his reasoning was, but it's also very interesting because you have, at the time, right, people were capturing, you know, scenes, either landscapes or like little still lifes, but it was very unusual to have your self-portrait done. Yeah. So the fact that he included himself, and he usually included himself with his eyes closed, and I read that it was not because of anything else, not because he perceived himself in a certain way, but only because of exposure time being so long. So imagine staying there half an hour, taking your own self-portrait. I'm all for visual diaries, and as many of you might know, watching and listening, I released my first book, which was a travel diary. Thank you. Which was a travel diary, and it's all about reflection and my experiences of photography and etc. I think I included one self-portrait there, but it really is something that I look back and I think, wow, look at me back then, and then like I can pinpoint the times and the places and what it meant for me and what I was feeling at the time and not feeling, because sometimes I did take self-portraits and I wasn't feeling like, you know, particularly happy due to something that happened, but I wanted to have that memory.
You know, I look back photos of myself, say 15 years ago. I know just from what I'm wearing, from my hairstyle, from my environment, I can kind of almost pinpoint, okay, I know what was going on in my life there. I know how I was feeling. And you can tell so much just by just looking at a person and where they are. And
exactly.
Just, I think if I showed it to other people, you would be able to tell almost what I was what stage in my life I was at as well.
Yeah, I do think there's a quality to that. And for me, for someone like him who, think about it, photography is just a novelty. And not only is he creative from obviously a creativity point of view, but also like he manages to build his own darkrooms, cameras, chemicals. He obviously, at the time, if you were a photographer, most likely you'd have to have a great knowledge on chemistry to be able to just do your things, right? I would invite him to my dinner party with impossible guests.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I'd love to know. I'd love to be like, look, I know that history is written by the winners, but I'm going to make sure that it also remembers the losers. And I'm not calling you a loser. I'm just saying that because of what happened to you. So I think you'd be like, Madame, merci beaucoup. and be like, no, I'm not enjoying this dinner. She's calling me a loser here. Yes. No, but I don't mean it. But I don't mean it in a wrong way of like, I actually think someone like him will never be a loser. Like the fact that he made so many things, but the way of what happens to him, it really makes him like, quote unquote, losing in this situation.
Yeah, I have a feeling though, as soon as he heard the word loser, he would have just got up and left.
No, it probably would be lost in translation.
But imaginary fancy dinner parties aside, you definitely, Bayard would have a good few things to talk about at the party. One of them also being that he was actually the first photographer to hold their own exhibition. And he did this in June of 1839.
My God. Okay. Interesting.
Which is quite cool. I mean,
I also read though that he mostly worked alone, right? So he was kind of like a lone wolf in this story, and which is unlike the methods that some of his contemporaries had.
Yeah.
Because obviously a lot of people are trying to solve this issue of fixing an image permanently, but some other people like to share their results, and some of the people named Louis Daguerre in this case, which is where he comes in. I think it's very important to mention him in this story because without him, probably Bayard would have been more successful. Basically, Louis Daguerre, he is credited very often with the invention of photography, or one of the main inventors of photography.
Daddy photograph.
No. He actually, by this time, according to what I know, he was already pretty well known and pretty well respected in France. Now, he had made a name for himself by inventing what is, I believe in English said, as dioramas. I know that he invented this in collaboration with someone else, but I forgot the name, and I'm really sorry about that. But this had made Louis Daguerre very, very, not only like well known, but also very interested in the possibility of image making. And he had been also dwelling for a few years now, mostly by trial and error, with the idea of fixing an image. And in fact, he did come up with a solution, right?
Again, pardon the pun. Yeah, so we did. I mean, we have talked about this already in another episode, of course. Just, for anyone, we'll just do a quick recap how he did this. He exposed a thin down silver copper sheet to the vapor of iodine crystals, which in turn produced a coating of light sensitive silver iodine, on its surface. This same plate would then be exposed to the camera, and that's how he came up with the daguerreotype.
So he was extremely successful with this, and he decided to share it with only a small circle of friends. And now this small circle of friends, obviously being, people with some influence and highly esteemed in society, they shared it with the press, they shared it with other members of society that were very highly regarded.
And we have to say Bayard was actually the one who had, from what we know, had actually done this before.
Yeah, so there's records of Bayard doing this by 1820 or 1820s. And this Louis Daguerre will happen in the 1830s. So we can't be precise as to 10 years, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. Records show different things. But basically the idea is that he comes up, Daguerre, with this solution, and then he gets to the eyes and ears of someone who with a lot of influence, and that was a politician, physician, astronomer
by the name of François Arago. Again, French people, please correct me if I'm wrong. And he was, a very prominent politician. He was an astronomer. And as it happened, he was the chair of the Academy of Sciences, which, obviously he's going to, these whispers that got to him, he's going to be interested in this.
And also the Academy of Sciences was one of the highest regarded academies at the time in France, not only because it's almost like the Ministry of Arts and Culture in the sense that they approved projects, they helped funding projects that obviously were technological advancements, or that could result in potential technological advancement. And in this case, Arago had looked at the daguerreotypes in 1838. He shook hands with Louis Daguerre. Was hoping to make a secret deal with him, in which he was trying to use his influence and also, his persona to basically have the government purchase the rights, I believe.
Yeah, in May of 1839, which is, I guess, probably about 6 months later, Bayard was demonstrating his version of, well, I mean, I want to say daguerreotype, but it's not a daguerreotype.
No, his version of making photographs and to Arago, who we don't know exactly the intricacies of this, but basically we know that Arago, or Arago, however it's pronounced, he managed to convince Bayard into keeping quiet about his own invention. Sorry for interrupting the episode here, guys and gals. I just wanted to quickly mention MPB. MPB is not only the sponsor of this podcast, but also one of the largest online platforms where you can buy, sell, or trade your used photography or videography equipment. Now, there's two sides to this coin. One is that you're probably initiating a new project, or you're, looking to get something fresh into your workflow, and you're looking for something new. So if that is the case, check out the catalog that MPB has available on mpb.com, and you'll quickly realize that they have everything from tripods to cameras, lenses, filters, gimbals, whatever it is, even audio and studio equipment. So definitely check it out. But also, on the inverse side of the coin, if you're looking to sell something because you're literally got so much gear that you haven't used, or you want to repurpose it for some reason, then definitely check out mpb.com. If you're looking to sell something and you don't want to deal with the hassle of it, the fees, and tons of people. And honestly, the process is very, very simple. All you have to do is you go onto their website and you basically pop in the details of whatever you're selling, and you'll receive a quote fairly quickly. And after that, you'll book the collection if you're interested, and everything is done really, really fast and quickly. I myself have used MPB, both buying and selling, so I'm speaking from a personal experience. So whatever it is that you're trying to do in these coming months, capturing aliens, or perhaps ghosts, or, time traveling, like some of the folks that we've been talking about on this podcast, definitely check out mpb.com, because you'll have a piece of equipment that you most likely need for that. And so what we do know is that Arago basically convinced Bayard into keeping his silence about his own invention or his own methods, right? And now I found different sources quoting different things. One was that potentially Bayard was paid to keep his silence. He was promised an opportunity to, reveal his methods before the Academy of Arts and Sciences, in this case, both together. Later on in the year, we don't exactly know what was told or what was the exact deal between the two of them. But we do know is that Bayard wasn't aware of the deal made between Daguerre and Arago. He wasn't aware of anything of this. So he wasn't aware of the true intentions of why he had to keep his discovery, a bit quiet. But he soon would find out when Daguerre, sitting next to Arago, they basically revealed the method by which he created daguerreotypes in front of the Academies of Arts and Sciences. So basically legitimizing the process, and in saying this, consummating the deal between the government of buying the rights to the method that Louis Daguerre delivered in this case.
So I mean, that would make complete sense if I was our poor friend, sitting there with my little crappy invention that means nothing.
Oh no, it's really sad.
Timing is everything.
Yeah, because I mean, the daguerreotype, from what I could read, spread like, crazy, and everybody was adopting it to make photos, not only in France but also internationally. We know that what would be in this deal for Daguerre, obviously prestige, a lot of money, a lot of influence, and possibly promises about future backing of future projects and adventures that he might have made. I don't know, but I assume. Now, I speculate of what could have been in the pot for Arago, and because it doesn't say anywhere I found, but I did find that Arago a few years later became technically the chairman of the governmental body of France. So technically like almost like a president. And he achieved that position by being elected. Okay. So I think that the reason why he did this is because he probably wanted to deliver the answer for this, very complex situation of actually fixing an image permanently. And within that process, he would gain a lot of influence, prestige, not so much money, but I think it was more like he would be really well seen.
That's it, exactly. As you said, if someone in a workplace, manages to get a client that saves the business, they're always going to be remembered for that.
Exactly.
So, he kind of, I suppose, secured his place in people's minds for this discovery. And I suppose we do have to remember it is a huge discovery at the time. So
absolutely,
I can kind of understand. I mean, we see he's an ambitious man. He's an astronomer, I think, as well as a politician. So he's got big ideas. So he literally grabbed that with both hands. And yeah, I think Bayard is collateral, unfortunately.
Collateral damage. Which I think I should pass you the word so that you can let people know what happened to Bayard and how did he deal with the fact that, technically speaking, he did invent photography, but he wasn't credited with it.
The Daguerreotype was still his dream. And I'm just calling it that now because retrospectively I feel kind of bad, that he didn't get to present that.
I know.
He did get to present his ideas to the Academy. And he had continued sort of honing his craft and how to create a better daguerreotype, as I'm going to call it. But at that stage, they were kind of...
It's too late, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was 1840. They're not interested anymore. They have kind of sealed the deal in terms of, we've got the daguerreotype. We know how we're going to do this. We're going to focus on this. So they just weren't interested in new ideas.
They just wanted to brush it under the carpet. I don't know.
I've watched episodes of Dragon's Den. Where people come in to the Dragons and they present an idea of business or a product.
Okay.
And like sometimes there has been a time where they say this person would be a nightmare to work with afterwards. And that is a huge thing. So I wonder if it was him as a person. I mean, we don't know what a presentation was
actually like. True. That's a really good point.
Maybe he made a mess of it. I mean, if you think about it yourself, if you go to a job interview, you might have a bad day and you mess it up, or you meet people that, want to work for you. I've seen it. Sometimes I've interviewed, and a lot of the time it's someone might have slightly better skills, but if someone is really able to talk to strangers, has a good attitude, that gives them the edge.
That's a good point, because like I said, we don't know the ins and outs of the situation. So I think it could be a possibility.
And I think it could be a possibility due to, I think as evidenced by something we're going to talk about now.
So how did he react? Will you tell the audience?
I'm trying to say, what word can I say that isn't going to, get me in trouble? He decided that he was going to voluntarily expire. I'm trying to think of a PC way of saying it.
No, there's no PC way. He staged his own death.
Yeah.
And took a photograph of it. And it's very funny. Like, it's funny in hindsight. I don't think it was very funny, but I think, the whole thing is quite hilarious. Like, the story is very lighthearted. That's where it comes in, the lightheartedness of this, because you can have a laugh in the end with this.
It's really funny because I think if you actually look at the image, if you look closely, it feels like there's a slight smirk on his face. I looked at it and I was just like, he's like, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. Produced on October 18th, 1840, the portrait is entitled Self-Portrait as a Drowned Man. So he pretends to have ended his own life by, staging himself kind of sitting and leaning towards the right of the frame. And in the background there's that hat that he loves, that strung hat, which he's absolutely obsessed with. And the tongue-in-cheek caption at the back of the photograph read, "The corpse which you see here is that of Monsieur Bayard, inventor of the process that has just been shown to you. As far as I know, this indefatigable experimenter has been occupied for about 3 years with his discovery. The government has been only too generous to Monsieur Daguerre, has said it can do nothing for Monsieur Bayard, and the poor wretch has drowned himself."
Do carry on. It's
Oh,
good.
the vagaries of human life. He has been at the morgue for several days and no one has recognised or claimed him. Ladies and gentlemen, you'd better pass along for fear of offending your sense of smell, for as you can observe, the face and hands of the gentleman are beginning to decay. And I suppose if you do look at the image itself, he does look a bit worse for wear. Like, he wasn't, up running errands a couple hours. He does look like he's expired for...
Yeah, but I think the whole thing is so interesting.
And dramatic.
First and foremost, because, yes, dramatic. I think when I look at this photo and I break it down, and judging by the caption, I do feel there's a sense of martyrdom. He considers himself a martyr of, and tricked by the government, which in fact he was, okay? Nobody's invalidating his feelings. I think is quite interesting. And then one thing about this caption is that it says, for instance, that Monsieur Bayard hasn't been claimed, and that he has been at the morgue for several days. Now, this is an actual comparison, not a comparison. This is drawn by the fact that this used to happen.
It's really sad, the idea of the Parisian morgue.
Yeah, so the Parisian morgue would be open every day, and the people, that had expired and had not been claimed or recognized, they would be basically for show. And very interesting though, is because he makes a mention to his belongings being there, is the fact that, once people were displayed in the morgue back in the day, whatever was found with them, usually personal belongings, clothing, etc., would be hanging above or next to them, so they could be more, so the process of identification could be easier. I think this image is super important. This is the first photo that really does show that photos can show something that is not truthful, because he wasn't dead, right? So that photos have the capacity of showing something that is not literal, which we know with photography these days. Obviously, as advanced as we are, we have seen so many things and beautiful photographs that have been taken over time. So I think this is a very interesting example. And just to close my thoughts here, to then pass it on to you, Sadie, I think that for me, he did invented photography, because he didn't invent it, or rather, if you want to say that he invented in a technical term, you can, and absolutely, there's nothing wrong about it. But in the terms of thinking as photography as a possible means of expression, self-expression, creation, and artistic side, he was in fact a pioneer. So for me, he did invent that side of photography.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I kind of agree with that. I think, he was beaten to the punch. We can't prove who was working on it first or whatever, but I don't actually think that really matters in this case, because I think in terms of maybe like a more artistic process and kind of not just capturing an image of what someone sees in front of you, he's thinking more about it. I mean, as we were saying, the objects that they place beside a nameless dead person. We've got the famous straw hat. So it is telling the story, and like that immediately can kind of hark back to his older images.
Absolutely.
Where you see this object and you can say, okay, well, this is kind of telling the story of someone's life. So I think it kind of reminds me of a series of paintings created by Hogarth in the 1700s. And they're called Marriage at a Mode. And it was a series of paintings basically that told the story of a really unhappy marriage. But you can tell a lot. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in how images tell stories, to look it up, because...
Of course they are.
Of course you are. I highly recommend it. There's good documentaries out there. I mean, maybe it's something we might talk about later. But
yeah, we could, absolutely.
There's an awful lot of symbolism in these drawings, or these paintings, I should say, that tell the story of how a marriage that comes together due to money rather than love falls apart over time. And it's brilliant. And I figure feel like I see some of this in this image of Bayard. Sorry, I was about to say Daguerre.
Yeah, but I think I like that. I like that he's very creative. And I think this is why I thought that this would be such a fitting story to end the season, or because it is lighthearted in a way, but it does bring some very important points together, which is also like why I believe a lot of people that might tune in with this podcast or with the channel, or my channel in this case on YouTube, is because they're interested in making photographs and learning about the craft, that sort of craft, and not so much the literal or technical aspects of it. So I think this is a fitting story for the type of content that I created, but also our conversations over this season.
Yeah.
And wanting to kind of maybe draw close to this before we give our final conclusions, one interesting aspect that I realized is that there was a sort of arc of redemption for Bayard, even though like I don't think it was necessarily his fault that he wasn't, that he was at loss in the situation, but he did become out of like the quote unquote inventors or grandfathers of photography. He was one of the most active. He continued to shooting prolifically throughout his life.
Yeah.
He was credited with a few inventions that will probably be on the notes if you guys are interested, with a couple of inventions that were interesting and that brought more to the game of photography.
Yeah.
And he actually was part, if I'm not mistaken, of founding the French Society of Photography. Yeah. So it's amazing.
And he's a successful guy, but I think it's really important, and that I think this is something that history has a habit of doing, that if someone is beaten to the punch for something really big, their other efforts and their other achievements are sometimes forgotten.
Yeah,
I think it is important to note that, I mean, this is someone that's worth looking into. I feel like almost artist or contemporary artist for the time is almost a better descriptor for what he is.
And I think that's at least my conclusion for today's episode. What do you think? I mean, I think that we've wrapped it up quite well in the end. I think that I hope in my experience, I really enjoyed making this season, and I hope you guys enjoyed every single, or at least enjoyed the majority of the things that we've been saying about like all these different characters. And I mean, that's all I've got for today. So, I will pass on the word to you if you want to say some closing notes.
I was thinking that just because it's the personalities as opposed to what they created for me, because I, as you know, I mean, I like weird people. I like strange, eccentric people. Perfect is boring. I like people that, might come out and say something a bit strange, or might decide that, tell you a weird story.
That think out of the box. Yeah.
Box. And yet they might be wrong. They, might have a few screws loose, if we can say that, but they are interesting. And they're the people that I would want to have at my dinner party. People that have something to say, people that aren't afraid to think differently, people that aren't afraid to ask questions.
It, to a certain extent, live their truth. I think that's a good way of putting it as well.
Because it's only in your head doesn't mean it's not true.
Well, I don't know. I think there's a lot of cases where it doesn't fit, but I think for these types of cases that we've been discussing on the podcast, yes, I agree. And I hope that you guys enjoyed today's episode. Let us know if you have any feedback, whether there is in the comments or through email. Our email will be down below as well if you want to give us some suggestions, some, feedback or etc. We'd appreciate it, because we'll be discussing maybe in our next episode how this season came to be, insights of our episodes, and also potential new things that we might bring.
Yeah.
So I guess should we close it?
Yeah, keep it weird, everyone.